One of the most important things you ever ingrained in my head just is like how to look at things, and it's extremely obvious, but when you realize it. But you said, I think it was in episode 97, the first one we ever did together. You're like the only thing that matters when you're looking at world powers and where their chess pieces are on the board is their GDP.
Yep.
Right? So who has the biggest GDP? We still do right now, but that gap's shrinking. And you keep talking about these different alliances that are forming, be it, the BRICS on one hand, be it, countries that where it's East versus West, and you have all these weird Eastern alliances between 2 or 3 different continents. And it's like, at what point do we got to get worried about the US dollar ceasing to be the reserve currency, which, just doing very basic math in my head, would effectively mean the end of the United States as the leader in GDP in the world?
It's a great question. So fact-based finance and economics, it's a long time away.
Okay.
The idea that the US dollar would decline so much that it's no longer the reserve currency, you're talking about decades, if ever.
Okay, that's good.
However, it's worth noting that the decline in the power and value of the US dollar as a reserve currency has been increasing exponentially for the last 5 years. So the world is diversifying away from the dollar. More trade than ever before is being done outside of the US dollar. Countries that have always traditionally used the US dollar are using less US dollars. So even though the decline can be counted in percentages, like 1.3%, 2.3%, the increase in that decline is exponential, because 5 years ago, it was like 0.02% of trade that would change out of the US dollar. So we're declining at a rate 10 times what we saw 2 years or 5 years ago. And if that trend continues, then 15, 30 years from now, we'll start seeing, US dollar valuations and US dollar trade drop 15%, 20% in a year. And that's fast. That decline, though, is largely tied to 2 things. One, the US dollar is stable, reliable, and insured by the United States. So there's still a lot of value in the US dollar that just simply doesn't exist in something like the Chinese renminbi or the Russian ruble. Because we've watched as those governments have completely changed the valuation of their currency just on a whim. US dollar doesn't really do that. It's pegged to more stable things than foreign currencies. So when you're a developing country, just imagine if you had $200 and you wanted to, you needed that $200 just to survive week to week, you're not going to invest it. You're not going to take $150 and put it in some penny stock and hope that penny stock explodes, right? You're going to probably keep it in your mattress, someplace really, really stable. It's not until you have like $100,000 that you'll take $500 and throw it into a penny stock and see if it explodes. So most of the developing world wants stability. So they keep trading in the US dollar. But the wealthiest countries out there, especially the wealthy countries that don't like the United States, those are the countries that are the fastest to dissociate themselves from the US dollar, especially now that the United States has set a precedent that if you hold US dollars in US banks, we're just going to take them from you if we don't like you.
Yeah, that's not a good precedent.
Not if you're trying to maintain the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world.
And that's where you're just thinking way too short term, because you're worried, you're pissed, maybe with fairness, about a geopolitical conflict, but you're not thinking about the precedent you're setting doing that. That's a problem.
Yeah, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that when we talk, GDP is the basic poor man's gauge of power. You have more GDP, you went up in power. You have less GDP, you went down in power. The other thing that's just like a nut hair away from GDP is something called PPP, or the purchase power parity, which tells you how much value you can get for your purchase power from the currency you hold. And in terms of purchase...
In English. In English.
So if I had a rock, if I had a red rock here and a blue rock here, they're both rocks. They both weigh the same amount. They're both made of the same material. When I give you my red rock, I get a cup of coffee. When I give you my blue rock, I get a cup of coffee and a piece of toast. Which one's more valuable? Even though they're exactly the same. That's what PPP or purchase price parity is. It means that with my rock, I can only get a cup of coffee, but with your rock, you can get coffee and a piece of toast.
Okay.
So now if we're comparing our currency against foreign currencies, in the United States, our rock gets us expensive groceries, expensive fuel, and we don't get much for our dollar. But in Russia, your ruble gets you less expensive groceries, a full tank of gas, and an extra cup of coffee. That means the purchase price parity, the ruble is higher than the purchase power parity of the dollar. Make sense?
Yes.
So what we have already seen change in the world is that for the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and more, their purchase power, their triple P, is higher than our triple P. So our GDP might be higher, but what they get for their currency is higher. That is the beginning of a tipping point where if I get more for a ruble, I want more ruples. So then the more people buy ruples, less people buy dollars, right? As less people buy dollars, what we hope will happen is that there will be a increased demand for the decreased supply of dollars, except that the Biden administration printed all this new money, which then threw a bunch of new dollars into the marketplace, which adds supply, which decreases demand and decreases the value.
Now let's revisit, though, one of the things you brought up that was a mindfuck to me in episode 107. I think we talked about this like maybe an hour and 35 minutes in, something like that. But you were talking about the economic smarts of creating a proxy war with Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. And correct me if I'm putting some words in your mouth here, but essentially because of, let's just boil it down to one term, the military-industrial complex being able to spend money in that region via our taxpayer dollars, and then have the hooks in and the contracts to rebuild what's left when it's done, it could effectively be a long-term value-saving hedge for the U.S. dollar and for the power of the dollar in that case, the Eastern world.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're saying, so you are correct. We are saying the same thing. When you fund a proxy war, war is profitable. Whether you win or whether you lose, war is profitable. It creates jobs. It creates a demand for lives. It increases industrial manufacturing. It increases food production. People start fucking when there's a war going on.
So bad, but it's true.
It's true, man. And that's why there's incentives. Like Japan and China are literally paying money for people to have sex, to make babies, to make future soldiers, because they realize if their population decline is a problem. Yeah. Right? Could you imagine I guess in the United States, we also pay people to have babies, but that's a different thing. So war is good for the economy. Yeah. What has happened now with the modern day proxy war, like what we're seeing in Ukraine and even what we're seeing in Israel, is that when you fund a conflict in another country, you get all the economic benefits without any of the lives lost yourself. So the United States is essentially bankrolling ourselves by supporting a war in Ukraine and supporting a war in Israel, et cetera, et cetera. And we had lots of proxy wars before that too. But it is economically smart. Making currency to fund those conflicts makes sense. Making currency to backfill a stimulus during the COVID crisis did not. And that's what we did wrong. We printed a bunch of money during the COVID crisis when there was no war going on, when we were just flooding our own market with dollars. What's fascinating to me is that, 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, you and I were talking about all this money that's being given to Ukraine. Yes, there is money being given to Ukraine, but there's a lot more money being given to American businesses, being given to American, causes. Like, we're buying American ammunition and sending it to Ukraine and calling that part of an aid package. Yeah, we're essentially keeping U.S. dollars in the U.S. pockets, but sending equipment and sending materials and personnel to Ukraine. We were talking about that. Nobody in politics, no headlines, no news articles were saying that. They were all saying, this is aid going to Ukraine, aid going to Ukraine.
That's right.
Biden starts running for office, starts justifying his support for Ukraine. And how does he justify it? By finally saying, hey, these packages that we're writing are going to American businesses.
American businesses, man. I benefit in America.
This money isn't even leaving the United States. Like, come on, support my Ukraine policy because we're gonna pull this money out of the government and put it into American businesses.
Joe, the camera's over there. Yeah. God damn it. That's true. I didn't even think of that.
So it's frustrating to me because this is why I still say we have to support Israel, because what's good for Israel is in many ways good for the United States. However, what's good for Netanyahu is not the same as what's good for Israel.
Now, okay? Can you define that difference there? That's key.
There's three important differences here, right? So first of all, it's frustrating to me how many people don't understand the difference between a Jew and Israeli.
Yeah.
Not the same thing.
What, Israeli or?
Israeli.
Okay.
Right? A Jew is someone who follows and believes in Judaism. That can be any citizen of any nationality anywhere in the world. They can be Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish in order to be Israeli. Israeli is a national identity, like American or Brazilian or whatever else, right? So the fact that Israel's government does not separate church and state, the fact that Israel, is a democracy that doesn't differentiate between church and state, that's one thing, but it's different from saying that if you don't support Israel, you don't support Jews.
Yes.
Completely different things. Then you have the entrenched political right-wing establishment of Israel. That is Netanyahu. So you've got one element of a government, that's Netanyahu. The government is the government of Israel. And then the faith of the state is Judaism. So you can be a Jew who has no connections to Israel, and that doesn't mean that we have to it makes me angry when people think that there's something wrong with a Jewish person because of what Israel's doing to Palestine.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's insane.
But I just want to say that out loud because you can support Jews and Judaism without supporting Israel. And I'm also saying that to all the Jewish people out there who are being told that if someone doesn't support Israel, then they are anti-Semites.
Right.
That's not true.
Yeah.
You can disagree with Israel's national policies and still have zero bias against the Jewish people. You can also disagree with Netanyahu and still support Israel.
Absolutely, yes.
But nobody's thinking of it that way. People think that Netanyahu is Israel and Israel is Judaism.
It's so stupid. Yeah.
And that's how we end up. And unfortunately, because our media in the United States is commercially based, it's a for-profit business.
Yes.
Anything that the media puts out that they want to get people stirred up, emotional, angry, alarmist, they'll make sure that they tie all those terms together. And, America hates Jews and wants to support Netanyahu.
And that's because, you're taking the words out of his mouth. He says he makes no distinction between anti-Semitism and anything that speaks out against Israel, which is, I would say, by definition, defining himself and his policies as Israel itself.
Right.
And that's when I've been talking with people about this, I'm like, look at all the Israeli people who are in the streets right now.
Calling for a new leader.
Yes, and these are not Columbia protest motherfuckers, morons. These are people who are passionate about their country, who are just yo, can we get a new, everyone wants to be safe, no one wants terror attacks, can we get a new fucking leadership in there? Because Netanyahu's the symbol of it because he's the head of the government, but I've also said this to people, if you've looked at his cabinet, he looks like a leftist compared to some of those people. They just got to get rid of some of the current administration, which, yes, also includes him. And if you get someone a little more moderate in there, there's always going to be disagreements. There's going to be people who are oh, my God, Israel's only going to do what's good for Israel and all this stuff. You'll always have that. But, I feel like it could be a lot more manageable because you're not going to win the PR campaign if you're just saying the only end is total victory. When you have all these, and I want to introduce this idea, all these other countries around there who, there's some that are hostile, and then there's some who are not, who are sitting there saying, look, we want a two-state solution. We want Israel to exist, but you can't do it completely all on your terms, which is what Netanyahu insists on.
Right.
So a guy that I look at a lot, this is why I bring this up, who is a gangster, he's really fucking cool, is the King of Jordan. This dude never wanted to be king. Mm-hmm. His father was croaking on his deathbed. He's like, you're gonna be king. And he's like, what the fuck did you say? And he passed over the older brother. And so this guy had been traveling around the world, wanted a whole different life, takes up this, I guess, calling or whatever. And in America, obviously, we're not huge on kings and queens and shit. We kind of fought a war over that. But, like, I'll make an exception for this dude.
Right.
I've had multiple people in here who are friends with him. Like Joby Warwick, tight with him. And Joby's written some things that aren't great for him. And the guy still likes him, which I really like. And Remy Adeleke is good friends with him. A couple other people are as well. But this guy, if you look at his history of all the, like, he took power, I think, in 98, 99. So think of all the things that have happened since then. Started with 9/11 right at the beginning all the way to where we are now. All these different crises that have happened, if you listen to what he said right before they did or right at the beginning, he play-by-plays what's going to happen. And so one of the things that he said on like October 10th or something like that, after October 7th, is that he's like, look, obviously our country has an allyship with Israel, but, and I don't know if he said it in these words, but he was essentially saying that doesn't mean that our current governments always have to agree with each other because there's political differences. And he said one of the questions he was getting was, well, then why won't Jordan take in the Palestinian refugees? And he's like, I'm glad you asked that. I will give the worst parts of Israel's government exactly what they want if I do that, because that will be effectively ethnically cleansing people from the land, getting it out of their hands.
Right.
Doesn't have to be a genocide or something. Getting them off of there, and Israel can go take that land.
Right.
And he's like, I don't agree with the current administration's policies on that. And again, I don't think he said it exactly like this, but he was insinuating like, just get new leadership in there, and maybe we can get this thing done.
Right.
And everyone can go home.
Egypt's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's twisted politics. Because you've got Israel saying that the Muslim world won't take Muslim refugees. And then you've got the Muslim world saying, we're not going to take refugees because you're going to block them out. Right. You're never going to let them come back. And essentially what you are doing is you're cleansing Muslims from their land, from their promised land.
Yep.
So it's a disaster. And it doesn't help that Netanyahu gets confused with being representative of Israel when he's not. And it doesn't help that Israel gets represented as a democracy when it has absolutely been a thriving democracy in the past, but it has been showing signs of weakening democratic values.
Why do you say that?
Because how many, like you said, Netanyahu's been in power for in and out of power for like 25 years.
Yeah.
Right? For people who don't know, Netanyahu is the Israeli equivalent of all the drama that surrounds Donald Trump. Right? He is also under corruption charges. He is also under criminal charges. He is also known as being like somebody who is hyper loyal to his own faction rather than to the people of Israel. There's a half of Israel doesn't want Netanyahu in power, just like half of the United States doesn't want Donald Trump to be in power.
Yeah.
Wildly controversial figure. Only somehow he has been a prime minister, moved out of the office, moved back into the office, always retained some kind of power, even when he's shrouded with criminal and corruption charges and fraudulence charges, right? Like there's all sorts of bad stuff around this guy, but he still has this power because, like you said, his cabinet, his cronies are ultra-Orthodox, ultra-right, and they're the ones that are really calling the shots. The world can hate Netanyahu because he takes the bullets for everybody else that he represents. But the question is Israel becoming more democratic? Because they're calling for, just look at what happened, after Benny Gantz, who was part of the war cabinet. Benny Gantz stepped out of the war cabinet in May, I want to say it was.
I think that's right, yeah.
And he said, if we don't have a solution to end Gaza, I will leave the war cabinet.
Yeah, respect to him, by the way.
And then he did. He said, fuck this, you guys, you don't have a plan for Gaza. I am leaving. I won't be part of this. What did Netanyahu do next? He dissolved the rest of the war cabinet. He was like, oh, well, shit, if Benny's going to leave,
we don't need it.
We don't need it at all. I got your war cabinet of one right here. And then all these, what's that sound like, dude? That sounds a whole hell of a lot more authoritarian than it does democratic, right? So, and then Jordan is a fantastic example because Jordan, they're gangster in Jordan.
Yeah.
Like,
Mukabara? Is that
the American military loves working with the Jordanians. The Jordanians like working with the U.S. military. They are not oil rich. They are just legit, hardworking, like industrial, entrepreneurial mindset people in the Middle East. And they're strategically relevant because they're neighbors to Israel right there in the center of the Middle East. But they're also Sunni and pro pro-Sunni, pro-Islam, pro-everything else. So Israel is not the only benefit or the only benefactor that we have in the Middle East. We're on good terms with UAE. We're on good terms with Saudi. We're on good terms with Jordan. We have other allies in the region. But the reason that Israel is so valuable to the United States is because we built that country after World War II. Like their democracy is based on our democracy, based on the UK democracy. Their industrial base, their manufacturing process, their natural resources are valuable to us, whether it's the gem trade. I mean, one of the largest exporters in the world of high-tech medical equipment is Israel.
Yeah.
So if you want an MRI, you're getting it out of an Israeli machine, unless you want to start getting your MRI out of a Russian or Chinese-made machine.
No, fuck that.
Right? So there's all sorts of reasons why we want to maintain, not to mention the promise that we made to the Jewish people coming out of World War II, that we would make sure that never happens again. Right? So there's all sorts of reasons why we need to protect the state of Israel. But that doesn't mean we need to adhere to this idea that there'll never be a two-state solution on the land where Israelis live.
You think that we built it though? That's an interesting comment.
Oh, are you kidding, man? That was our MO coming out. Who built France? We did. Who built Germany? We did.
I agree with that.
UK? We did. Japan? We did. Everybody who was devastated coming out of World War II, we built their countries, rebuilt their countries with debt, financing, with democratic principles, whatever else, right? And that's what we did with Israel too. We went in there and we were like, hey, we're going to give you this land. And on top of that, we're going to give you economic structure. We're going to give you trade. We're going to give you aid. We're going to make you dependent on us. And then in the process of doing so, Israel became very wealthy. And guess what? Guess where Israel buys all their weapons? Guess where they buy all their tech from? Us.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I understand now. Yeah. I mean, Germany's like the ultimate case study of that, literally. Like the whole western half of the country was done by us after that. That was crazy. But, you know, you and I, the last time we were sitting in a studio together was down in Tampa with Danny and Jim like a week before October 7th. So we were like 2 weeks off having a fireworks of a podcast. But, you know, this is the first time we're really talking about that and litigating what the fuck happened here. And so I remember the last time we were in a studio, just you and me, was June 2023. And to your point earlier, we talked a bit about Mossad there for maybe 5 minutes or something about some of the tactics and stuff like that. But they're at the center of October 7th to me because, you know, if you've studied up Mossad, and I mean, for you, if you've seen it, because you worked in espionage, so you know a lot more than us, like, they're widely respected as a very talented intelligence agency for various reasons. You can read books like Gideon's Spies. You can read a book like Ronan Bergman's Rise and Kill First, which is really, really telling as far as the mentality and everything. And then you look at something like October 7th and you're like, how the fuck did they let this happen? Because, you know, you're talking about guys, obviously it was a very impressively executed mission funded by Iran, as you laid out earlier, not disputing that. But, like, they still had to go across the border into Israel, which, you know, I haven't been on that border. I think I was when I was 18, but I don't remember it, so that doesn't count. Like, as far as recently, like, when I talk to people who have been there in the last couple of years, you can't take a shit near that border without a fucking sniper rifle trained on you. So how much had to go wrong for something like that to actually happen? And for all, I mean, there's what, like 1,300 people that were killed or something like that? There's a lot of people.
So the reality is that the way that attack happened on October 7th would have required a lot of communication and cooperation, collaboration between multiple different agencies in Israel. Mossad is charged with external intelligence, meaning intelligence coming in from outside of Israel. Shin Bet is in charge of protecting the land of Israel. Shin Bet's their internal service. It's almost like FBI and CIA. But then it happened on the border, which means that there's like a border control element, and their border patrol element in Israel is closely tied to their defense force, IDF. So you basically have three different organizations that all have to collect information and communicate and disseminate that information with each other in order to identify a threat, and then they all have to collaborate to protect and prevent against that threat. So what happened on October 7th isn't a failure of one agency. It's a failure of multiple agencies. And since the October 7th attack, what we've learned is that there were members of the IDF who saw suspicious activity and reported it up the chain. And then the people up the chain within that agency had differing opinions about whether or not it should be disseminated to Mossad or Shin Bet, or the credibility of the reports at all. Shin Bet had reports that they escalated up the chain. Mossad had reports that they escalated up the chain. But at the bureaucratic level, the communication didn't happen. And if anything, in my opinion, that is what makes October 7th similar to 9/11. It was a failure of communication between multiple agencies that resulted in a tragic attack.
Yeah, here we had the CIA and FBI famously going at it and not exchanging info.
Which led to the development, the whole creation of the Director of National Intelligence, the whole creation of TSA, the whole creation of Homeland Security. All of that
government agencies.
Because
love that.
The two couldn't talk, so we need three more to make sure they talk.
Throw another letter in the alphabet.
Could you imagine? That's like saying like a husband and a wife can't talk, so what we need is more spouses.
That's right.
It's like, you know what I really need is I need another husband and two more wives to be part of this. And that's gonna improve our communication.
Yo, fuck the husband, but we'll take a couple more wives. That's it. Got us some options, baby. But I don't know, that day has been relitigated because of what has happened politically and then on a war aspect afterwards. And so you have this very, very strong sentiment around the world where it's much more like, yo, fuck Netanyahu and what's going on here, because obviously terrorist attack, very bad. Obviously there has to be defense or something like that for that problem not to exist. But people get hung up on, things Netanyahu said in the past. Like in 2019, he said in the Knesset, like, if you don't want a two-state solution, you have to be okay with funding Hamas. Does that mean Israel was funding Hamas? Not necessarily. You don't know that. But when you have the leader of the party saying that, it's like, are you playing two sides against the middle here to get what you want? And, because something bad will happen if you do that. No matter how you're getting the money there, hidden or not, doesn't really matter. And there seems to be an indiscriminate, and unfortunately this does happen in war all the time, we've seen it, but there's an indiscriminate effect on human life that we're seeing in Gaza. And I say that with the asterisk that, like, you can't believe every number that comes out. There's propaganda on both sides. Right. When I see the death count, like I looked at the death count this morning, I'm like, okay, it's probably not that. But it's not good. There's rockets being fired everywhere. The images are the images when you look at it from a drone. Like, yes, there's cities that are leveled. I get it. War is ugly. But, like, where does it end?
I think that's the $1 million question. I don't see this conflict ending soon. I see it escalating before it ends. I also don't necessarily think I don't think that Netanyahu is going to get his one-state solution. If anything,
I agree.
What's tough is this is a decision that multiple countries have to make, because supporting Palestine and establishing a two-state solution and making it sustainable is never going to come from just Israel. And because the United States needs Israel to be happy with the United States, it's not going to be led by the United States either. We'll sit back in a nice, like, velveteen chair and say, we think there should be a two-state solution, but we're not going to get off of our asses and go in there and help make it happen, because there's no benefit to us. There's a benefit to us if Israel is stable. There's a benefit to us if Israel is strong. There's a benefit to us if Israel has, an if they have an economy that is pro-U.S. and continues to buy U.S. weapons. We don't need a second Palestinian state to have all those things happen. So we'll sit here and we'll preach, but we're not going to take action. The place where the action has to happen is in the Middle East itself. It's in all of the Muslim nations. And if you start to have a banding of Muslim nations together to support it, that could move the United States, because now we have larger interests at stake. If Saudi gets involved, if UAE gets involved, if Jordan gets involved, if Egypt gets involved, now the United States can't sit on their ass anymore. even more so if we start seeing China or Russia or Iran or, the BRICS nations, if we see them start to lead the development of a two-state solution, then you'll see the United States jump the fuck out of their seats and be like, oh no, we're here to help too. Right? Let us keep our influence in this region. So the way it ends, I don't know. I will say this. Netanyahu is the one leader in the world right now who's at the largest likelihood of being unseated from within. All the talk about Putin was never really valid. The idea that Putin's cronies were somehow going to take him out or replace him or overrun him from inside, we've seen now how untrue that was. Netanyahu and the democratic process itself, he stands a real risk of actually being voted out, vetoed out, pulled out, kicked out, something. I don't think he's going to be assassinated from within, but he is a strong-arm leader right now, and Israel has to decide whether they want a strong-arm leader. And they have plenty of alternates, like plenty of opposition leaders to choose from who can step up and take Netanyahu's place. And the United States doesn't want to see an authoritarian Israel. They want to see an Israel that is pro-U.S. And an Israel that's pro-U.S. is an Israel that relies on the United States.
Yes.
So the United States is going to back somebody in a race against Netanyahu. It's just a matter of when.
In your career, how much, because like Israel diplomatically, we look at all these different countries, whether it be Israel, Britain, countries that are like friends diplomatically. One thing I've learned talking to a lot of you guys who were in espionage, a lot of times there's no such thing as a friend.
There is no such thing as a friend.
Yeah, in the espionage world. Nonetheless, there's the imagery to make it appear that way sometimes. That's why we have things like the Five Eyes where, they claim to share all information. They probably don't. But with Israel, did you do work with them? Did you have overlap with them during your career? And if so, what was the nature of that you can talk about?
Yeah, so the short answer, it's classified, it's sensitive. The United States the CIA works closely with Mossad on a number of different priorities, not every priority, right? So during the global war on terror and all of the years of that war, which were some of my core years at CIA, Mossad and CIA were hip and hip on counterterrorism issues. The United States and Mossad were hip and hip on counter-nuclear proliferation issues, right? So issues of preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. Yeah. But on topics like the rise of China, now all of a sudden there's secrets between Mossad and the United States. And you got to keep in mind too that there's a long history of Israel spying against the United States by creating moles inside the U.S. government.
Yeah, Jonathan Pollard.
Exactly. So even though Israel is an ally and a friend, they are still actively cultivating and creating penetrations of our government, our CIA, our intelligence infrastructure, our military infrastructure.
Do we do that to them?
We do that to everybody. That's why there's no friends. Right? No, everybody does it to us. We do it to everybody else. Right? Remember when Obama was caught spying on Angela Merkel in 2009, I think it was?
That was Obama?
That was under the Obama administration.
It was?
Mm-hmm. I may have started under the Bush administration before him. I think it was Bush before him, wasn't it?
Yeah, can we pull that up? That's clicking in my head. But yeah, point taken.
Yeah, so sure. we don't have, there are no friends. Everybody spies on everybody else. In the intelligence world, that's just carte blanche. So that's an answer to your question. Like, did we work with Israel? Yes. The specifics, I can't disclose. Those are something that, those missions, those specific avenues, the way that we liaise, all of that stuff is still very classified. What I will also say, though, is that when you work with Mossad, they are really good at what they do. Not only in terms of, bang, bang, blow it up, but also in terms of sitting across the table from you and you feel like you're with a friend. Like they are very, very good.
Come on, break bread with me.
Very, very good at human intelligence collection.
Yeah. I mean, those books I recommend, Gideon Spies and Rise and Go First. Yeah. You can really see it in that. All right, yeah, we just, unless you pulled this up. So Merkel calls Obama about U.S. spying on her phone. No, we would never. We would never do that.
Germany is a friend and a democracy.
I've always wondered, like you've said in the past, that, there's some countries where the intelligence is so good and you'd never expect it. And you're like, ooh, was unfamiliar with your game. And then there's other countries where you're like, ooh, not good. And I always have wondered if Germany's one of them.
The BND is the German External Service, right?
Are they one of them?
It's really fun. They're very good at technological collection.
Apparently not.
No, that's how they caught it.
Oh, but they didn't stop it. That's the problem.
Well, you can't. I mean, catching it and stopping it are two different things.
Okay.
Finding out that you're listening in on my phone doesn't necessarily mean I have the technology to block the technology that you're using to spy on my phone.
Okay.
Right? But it's still the first step. Otherwise, not even knowing that you're spying on my phone means I don't even have the awareness that you're spying on me at all. So there's always two steps to an intel operation. There's identifying it, and then there's countering it. Either way, the BND is really funny because inside Germany, Germans hate their intelligence service because of the long history all the way back to like pre-World War II, where the internal German services all spied on their own people, right? So BND has to carry all of that baggage, and culturally, the people don't like the BND. Culturally, they think the BND is corrupt. They think that the BND is incompetent. They think the BND is their deep state, right? So the Germans do not like their own intelligence service, which isn't all that different from what happens here in the United States, except there's a solid group of people here in the US who also recognize and appreciate CIA. There really isn't a solid group of people inside Germany who like the BND. But the BND is very, very good at technical collection because Germany is a wealthy European country. They're one of the two top economic earners in Europe. And they put almost all of their money into technical collection, technical intelligence capabilities inside of Germany to protect German interests. The other wealthy country is France. France is the DGSE, that's their intelligence service, also very well funded, also very capable, but the focus of the two is different. Germany focuses heavily on technical collection. DGSE focuses on offensive and defensive industrial and economic espionage more than just technical collection. But they're both very well funded because a huge portion of their GDP gets reinvested into intelligence. That's why in NATO, the German chancellor, I think it was last year in 2023, the German chancellor said, we're going to take money away from our intelligence service and invest it into our military base so that Germany can become the new military leader of Europe, of NATO, so that we're not so dependent on the United States. Which is funny to think that Germany is going to invest in growing its military to become the new military power of NATO. Because the last time Germany had a giant military power, didn't turn out so good for, the North Atlantic.
No, it didn't. That's interesting that attitude you point to is this psychological thing that's existed across generations in their society. And it's, the easiest thing to break is trust.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing to build is trust.
Absolutely.
Right? So you do one thing and it's gone. And I think about this a lot here now because you and I have had plenty of conversations before. We don't need to go through and redo some of those. But yeah, there's things that are different intelligence agencies, because there's a bunch of them, that they do that I think are a huge problem. There is influence where I think they've gone way too far. We're talking about, constitutional issues and stuff like that. Putting that aside for a second, though, I understand the blowback that many people feel, like I do, towards those things, and then the fact that many of those people then respond how? And I'm talking about Americans right now, and I'm talking online, right? They respond by saying, get rid of these agencies and stuff. And I look at them, and like everything else, I'm like, all right, can we please live right here? Like you're going here, bad idea. Here's a very bad idea too. I agree with that. We don't want to trample on rights. That's why you and I have had some disagreements on like Edward Snowden, who I think was in a very bad position. But, he saw a lot of rights being trampled on. How do we live here? Because if you do, I don't know, get rid of CIA. See, I'm a realist. I feel like we'd last 2 days, maybe 3, right? And shit would just hit the fan, and you can't hold yourself to a way higher bar, unfortunately, than all these other countries do. But how do we do that in a way where we don't take it too far and say, you know what, we know the Constitution's important, but your safety is more important, to the point that in the future you live in a society where they completely run everything, and the worst of those people, meaning not many of the good people that you work with, which I believe you did work with, but the worst of those people can take advantage of those powers and turn America on its head.
We started going wrong in the 1970s when we made this transition to populist and career politicians. From prior to that, like people would come out of the military and have a fantastic military career and then become a senator or congressman, and they would have a second career in politics. So they would have a 20-year career in the military, and then they would become a congressperson for 5 or 6 terms, and then they would rotate to another congressperson, right? Like they were public servants. Well, then we started having these freshman congresspeople and freshman senators who were young and would spend 25 years, 30 years in politics.
Yep.
Our country is built, to your exact point, right? Our country is built on the idea of representative democracy, like democratic principles, which means you're supposed to focus on being a podcaster. That's what you're supposed to focus on. You're supposed to focus on good content, creative conversations, pushing the envelope, getting it published in high quality, video and high quality audio. That's what you're supposed to do. And then periodically, you're supposed to vote on somebody to represent your constituency interests at a higher level of politics. You're not supposed to meddle in politics. You're supposed to be responsible and ethical in the way that you choose a representative who will represent you for the next 2 years in Congress and the person who will represent you for the next 6 years in the Senate. And you're supposed to do that for your state and for your county and for your federal government, right? For your national level. That's what you're supposed to do along with being a podcaster. We gave up our civic duty to find the right representatives from the 70s on. We started not doing our civic duty to understand who we were voting for. We started voting for whoever was advertised to us. We started voting for whoever was espousing the 2 or 3 priorities that we cared most about, right? And then as older people voted more and younger people voted less, then you started having this dichotomy of the only policies that people were really paying attention to or talking about or trying to move the needle on were the 2 or 3 policies that were most impactful to the older generations. That's why you always see healthcare as a debated topic. That's why you always see Medicare and Medicaid as a debated topic. That's why you always see, immigration as a debated topic, because that's what older generations care about. Younger generations care about something completely different. So as like generation after generation goes by, you have these entrenched politicians who do not represent the constituencies that they're supposed to be representing, which results in the constituency members like you and me thinking and talking more about politics when we don't have any power over politics except to vote for who could change the future of politics. So to your point, how do we live here? Like, how do we not go to the place where we disband CIA, but also not go to the place where CIA has no oversight at all?
Yeah.
Right? How do we stay in the middle? We have to lean into the democratic process that we built here in our country and make sure that we participate in local elections, participate in senatorial, gubernatorial, and congressional races, get people who represent our interests into office, because once those people are in office, they become the oversight committee for CIA. They are dedicated to actually representing the constituency that voted them into office, because they don't care about making the party happy. They care about making their constituency happy because they know that their head is on the chopping block as soon as 2 years or 6 years is up.
I think this is great. I think you're missing 2 words though, and the 2 words you like: term limits. For what you're saying to work, you have to put that into place in both the House and the Senate in some fashion, because you will always create too much of a high volume incentive for someone to win on a Tuesday in November and not do the right thing.
As long as you have professional politicians, you'll never have term limits.
Yeah.
Because a professional politician can't put a term limit in place because it terminates their career. So how are we going to get there? You and I have to vote fucking people into office who will get there and vote for term limits, right? That's, as much as people want to hate Donald Trump is the closest thing to how our presidential policy or process was supposed to work that since like the forefathers themselves.
What? Why?
Because he's not a professional politician. He is a business person who is stepping out of business to sacrifice 4 years of his life in office, or 8 years of his life in office, and then he's supposed to leave and go back to contributing to business. That's how our country was built. That's what the forefathers wanted. They wanted successful business people, successful entrepreneurs, successful executives, successful doctors and attorneys and everything else. They wanted them to be successful in their career, run for office, win the election based on the people, represent the people's needs for a term limit, and then step out of office and go right back into their job, right?
Yeah.
What did George Washington do?
Yes, exactly.
That's how it was supposed to work. We fucked that system up, dude, and we became driven by professional politics. We became expert marketers and calling ourselves campaigners instead. Like, so we, the American people, have to take some freaking ownership of how fucked up our government is. Because when we don't pay attention, when we don't vote, when we don't get off our ass to go to every electoral, registration or every poll, we're just entrenching the current process more and more.
How often do you and your CIA colleagues, like during your career, how often when you're in the middle of missions or whatever, wherever the fuck, would you guys talk politics?
We don't talk a lot about politics, frankly, because the issues that are happening around us, like the actual operation itself, demands most of our mental energy. But what we do talk about is how fucked up the nature of operations is, because it's not based on priorities that are operational.
What do you mean by
It's
that?
based on political priorities.
Priorities that are operational.
So think of
I got it.
Yeah, think of an operation as like a project in a business, right? So your boss, you work in a cereal factory, and they want to create a new flavor of cereal. In order for that new flavor of cereal to be approved and created, you have to have a budget committee that meets, you have to have a marketing committee that meets, you have to have the boss has to give 3 different bosses have to say yes. And then only after everybody says yes, some pile of money is then dedicated to the project. And then only after the pile of money is dedicated to the project can you go about buying the machine, buying the ingredients, and creating the cereal, right? There's a process to it. Same way with secret agent operations or military or clandestine operations. Somebody has to propose it. Somebody else has to sketch it out. Somebody else has to approve it. 3 different levels of leadership have to say yes. Then a bucket of money comes over. And that bucket of money is usually 50% of what you actually asked for, because they want proof of concept before they give you more money.
Yeah.
So that's the machine. So what ends up happening is when you're the ass on the line, you're like, we're supposed to do this big thing. We're supposed to collect secrets about hypersonic missile development in Iran. That's what we're supposed to do. We asked for $15 million. They gave us $5 million. And they told us that in 365 days, we have to demonstrate XYZ progress in order to get the next installment of $5 million. So now we're trying to launch an operation that's underfunded to fulfill a priority that the current policymakers said is a $15 million priority. Well, guess what's going to happen over the next year? There's going to be half the states are going to have new senators. There's going to be or new Congress people, right? Things are going to change. So then you might be 6 months into your 1-year op, 6 months into the first year of a 5-year op, and then new policymakers step in and Russia invades Ukraine. And then the policymakers are like, we don't care about hypersonic missiles in Iran right now. What we care about is intelligence on the battlefield in Ukraine.
And they really have that much power to say we know where you're spending every single dollar? Because a lot of people at home wonder if that's really the case.
Absolutely, man. Because there's so much oversight. Like, dude, when you meet with an asset in the field, if you're an informant in the field and I'm your handler and we meet and I slide you $50 and I'm like, thank you for your information. Here's $50. Do you know what I have to slide you next? A piece of paper for you to sign as a receipt. I you not. And then on that receipt in English, it has to say $50, my name, and then you have to sign it with something identifiable to you as the asset. So it can be an X or a Y or an
every
L.
time.
Every time. Because then I have to take that receipt back, and guess who I give it to?
Uncle Sam.
A budget and finance person who has to take my receipt along with all the other receipts from all the other field officers who had a meeting that day. And he has to run it against a budget that says, I gave $250 to field officers today, and I got $250 in receipts. And I can now put this $250 under a line item that says paying informants or paying assets, right? Field, slush fund, whatever it is. The same thing has to happen with every piece of equipment that comes in and out. If I want to put a GPS tracker on your boat, I have to request that GPS tracker.
Always?
Always.
Shout out to Linda at CIA doing God's work out there. Jesus Christ. I don't want that job.
So that's why if we often talk, and I've said this to you before, right? There's only 10% of CIA that works undercover, roughly. And then of the people that work undercover, it's only about another 10% that operate in the field undercover.
Yeah.
That means the other 97% of the population of CIA is there to support those undercover operations financially, administratively, analytically, logistically, right? We have our own cartographers that make maps. We have our own librarians that look shit up. We have our own tech people who create ways for us to have, covert cell phone communication. Everybody's all those personnel, all that talent, all that money is there to support a few field operations. Not because those field operations are super dangerous. Some of them are, but because it's a fucking administrative burden.
Yeah.
To be able to communicate back to the Congress who approves the funding, like, hey, you gave us $5 million. We spent that $5 million responsibly.
You've heard different guys, though, from those seats, like, vaguely say things, not even vaguely. Like, I'm thinking of one right now, Chuck Schumer, longtime senator, career politician, powerful guy in D.C. He said things on TV talking about, like, you don't want to make enemies with the intelligence community. And the implication there is they got a lot more power than I do. So it almost surprises me that things like this would be like the intelligence community during serious operations would actually care that much about following every letter of law because they got to report it to Senate. It's almost like, can't they report whatever they want to Senate?
Absolutely. And that's the reality. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? In some parts of the world, if you're in Africa, you might pay somebody with $250 and get a receipt. If you're in more important places like Russia, you're probably not paying somebody $250. You're probably paying them like $25,000.
Nice bricks of cash.
Right? Big chunks of cash.
Big chunk.
So that means all the same process applies. I'm going and getting approval to bake a little football that carries $100,000 in cash. If you've never seen $100,000 in cash, it's not very big.
Yeah.
Right? We get that thing wrapped up in non-sequential bills. Maybe we even have it converted into local currency. So we're doing it in Armenia. So it's an Armenian currency. Who knows what? We wrap it up. We take it to the meeting. We hand it off. We get our receipts. That's $25,000 or $200,000 or $100,000, whatever it is, $100,000 that has now been transferred. We don't know what the fuck it's being spent on.
Apparently not.
So imagine 10 meetings like that.
Yeah.
Now you have $1 million that have just been exchanged. You come back to the Senate House and you're like, we spent $1 million on intelligence against Russia. And they're like, well, where did that $1 million go? And you're
Don't
like,
worry about it. Don't fucking worry about it. You understand?
Even worse, we'll be like, we spent $1 million on getting secrets from Russian assets. And they're like, but you still didn't know when they were going to invade Ukraine? And you're like, well, if you would have given us $2 million, we could have done that too. And that's the back and forth, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of money that gets lost. Just think about what happened with the Mujahideen that then turned into the Taliban.
In the 80s? Yeah.
We were giving them money. We were giving them shoulder-carried rockets. We were giving them ammunition. We were giving them training.
How'd that work out?
All that stuff came back as receipts, but then you saw how it all worked out.
We got some receipts a mile away.
Bingo.
Jesus Christ. I mean, the 500-pound elephant in the room there is, though, does China have to get receipts when their intelligence agents are doing this shit?
Nope.
Russia?
Nope.
Iran?
They're not democracies.
Yeah, I'm not going to go through every country, but again, like...
The oversight is completely different. We have...
Sometimes I want it both ways.
I totally agree. And unfortunately, man, the 1,000-pound elephant to your 500-pound elephant is that every American is sitting in their fucking lazy boy, sitting at their desk, sitting on the shitter, asking themselves the same question.
Yeah.
I kind of want it both ways. What do we mean? We kind of want to be a democracy, but get the chance to skip the democratic process every now and then.
Right.
If we, as the world's superpower, if we're asking ourselves that question right now, what is every developing nation also asking themselves right now? Do we want to be a democracy or do we want to be authoritarian? And that is the real reason that we're seeing such a rise in power and popularity for leaders like Xi Jinping, leaders like Vladimir Putin, leaders like Netanyahu, leaders like the Ayatollah in Iran. Iran just had an election. They just elected a new president who's a reformist.
Is that a real election?
Yeah, I think it's a real election. I mean, the fact that he won, I remember when he was running, I sat there with my wife, who's former CIA, and both of us were like, if that dude wins in Iran, like that's going to really upset the apple cart, because we've been saying for a long time that Iran is not a democracy. Even though Iran does practice democratic principles, the narrative that has been adopted in the United States from all the messaging that you hear about Iran is that it's like a extremist haven for terrorists and authoritarian rule under the Ayatollah. Well, they just showed that people turn out, people vote, and then they respect the vote. They honor the vote of the people, a very small group of people. And again, the Ayatollah knew that the people voting were a small group of people and they were going to vote for this reformist. Yes. So he tried to get more of the fundamentalists out to vote against the reformist. It just didn't work because the Iranian people themselves don't believe in their own democratic process. Nevertheless, what we have seen is that because there's a new reformist president in Iran, we lose the chance to say that Iran is not a democracy anymore, because they just had a democratic vote. They voted in an opposition leader, and that opposition leader is now working hand in hand with the Ayatollah. Does that mean that the Ayatollah has any less power? No, but it does challenge the messaging and the narrative that has existed about Iran.
That's wild that we could sit here and say, like, oh, they're a little democratic over there.
Isn't that fucking crazy?
You know what? They love democracy.
They love democracy. They do. They just love their Ayatollah more.
Oh, my God. God, that was such a fuck up, letting that happen in 79. Such a fuck up to let that happen. And now, we're fucking 55 years later. And you know what? The Shah's son, Pahlavi, have you followed him at all?
No.
Very interesting. So when that place falls in 79, the family gets refuge in the United States. So he lives here, raised his daughters here. I think his mom's here too. So the wife of the Shah of Iran. And there's conversation that when and if they were able to push out the regime in Iran, that he would return home and be installed as, I don't know if it would be a Shah, but as like the leader. Now, this is a guy who's lived in America for the last 55 years in D.C., hobnobbing with everyone down there. And it makes you wonder, like, if there is a regime change, I'm just being a realist here, wouldn't it make sense that all the countries who are most invested in seeing that happen, meaning like Western countries like the United States, maybe would want to plug in a guy who's one of their own like that?
Absolutely, but that's not new news. Like,
no, it's not.
Yeah, every country wants to influence an election to get a candidate that is going to see things their way.
But literally, someone who I don't want to use the term like on the payroll, but like, I mean, look where dude lives. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is.
Yeah, getting somebody on the payroll to also win the ticket is tough. That's also a lot of pre 9/11 CIA stuff. Trying to sway elections, trying to...
Pre 9/11?
Yeah, pre 9/11.
What about a little post 9/11?
Post 9/11, the oversight is significantly different, man. It's a different world of intelligence post 9/11. It's hard to explain, but when I started CIA in 2007, the people who were training me in field tradecraft were all people who had built their career pre 9/11, right? 10, 15, 20-year veterans teaching the newest class. They knew nothing about the war on terror. They knew about the Cold War. They knew about the world with no oversight. They knew about the world before you had to document everything. We were being trained in a new way, where everything had to be documented and everything had to be approved and everything had oversight. So there was this discontinuity in the training where they would be teaching us something that they themselves only recently learned.
Yes.
And then their war stories would be war stories that we would never get to do because they were involved in like trying to poison Castro and have his beard fall out.
And you can't do that?
No, we can't do that now. Maybe with the right court approval you can.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, now it's a different world now.
You're good company, man. I'll give you that. You're good. You say that with a straight face. Like, we would never do that. We never try to take out a world leader. That is beneath us.
Oh, it's
as
not
an organization.
It's not beneath the organization. It's just administratively difficult.
Okay. All right. That's a better answer. I like that answer. It's administratively CIA killing other world leaders. Administratively difficult.
Administratively
I can accept
challenging.
that. See, that's why doesn't it feel better to be honest? You know what
I've never been anything but honest with you, brother. So if the whole reason, like Snowden, and I love disagreeing with you on Snowden.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, we don't have to do it much. It's always nice to talk about a situation where you're wrong.
That was good. That was good. I didn't see that coming. Say that to John tomorrow.
Oh, dude, I can't.
Just like
I
that.
am so excited.
I'm very excited. You are two of the smartest individuals I've listened to on podcasts before. You're both brilliant men. You come at it. We're talking about John Kiriakou, by the way. That podcast, I'm sure Danny Jones is doing it with you. It's going to be amazing. It's going to come out after this one. So everyone stay tuned for that on Danny Jones' podcast channel and go subscribe. But John Kiriakou is a former extremely high-level CIA guy who ended up going to prison for commenting on stuff. And there's a whole story there. And it's really fucked up what they did to him. But he likes some of the stuff that Snowden did, and there's a lot of disagreements you guys have. So that's going to be great. But I don't want to get you off track here. You're talking about your opinion on it. So
No, it's all good. Just the idea that, so let's just compare Snowden and Assange, right? Because Assange just recently got sent back to Australia. Espionage charges were lifted. Like, he's a free man.
Yes.
After fucking
a while.
12 years?
I don't know if it was that. It was a long time.
It was a long time between British prisons and
the embassy.
Yeah, the embassy in Ecuador. Yeah, right. So, and the argument for both is the same, even though the circumstances for both are totally different. Snowden was an American citizen. He was a contractor for a government contracting organization that was working for NSA. So, like Booz Allen Hamilton or Raytheon or somebody. So he wasn't a sworn officer, but prior to becoming a contractor, he was a sworn officer. So he's working for NSA on a commercial contract when he comes across this program that he believes is a violation of American rights.
It's called Heartbeat, I think.
I forget the name of the program.
Heartbeat for, we'll come up with it.
Right. But so to whistleblow, he takes the story to a foreign news source, The Guardian, which is a UK news source, and he breaks the story in a foreign news source and then flees to a series of countries that are not, that are American adversaries.
I want to step in for 1 second. And you're correct that he went to like Hong Kong, which, is under the veil of China. I'm with you there. The Russia thing, his plane got down there. Vice President Biden at the time diplomatically ordered his plane down in Russia. So that was not his plan.
Right. But before Hong Kong, he was in He was in Ecuador. He was in Cuba. He was
in Cuba?
Maybe not Cuba. Can we track?
Yeah, where did
we track all the places that Snowden essentially traveled in his escape from the United
Hawaii?
States?
When he went from Hawaii to Hong Kong, did Snowden go anywhere in between?
I don't think he went straight to Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong.
I don't think you can you from there. Oh,
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure he spent years in South America. It was in like Uruguay or Ecuador. He was somewhere.
So he went.
There it is.
Edward Snowden's movements.
Invaded U.S. Go ahead and click on.
Well, no. So all right, you're not. I think you have it a little bit backwards.
Hawaii to Hong Kong.
Yes, your point remains. He was trying to go to Ecuador, and his plane was downed in Moscow, so he never got there. But he was going to a country that maybe has some diplomatic issues with America. Okay.
Correct. So the point is, he was an American citizen who exposed secrets that he had been sworn to keep, and he knew the purpose and intent of the intelligence agency because he was a sworn officer of the federal government before he was a contractor. That exposing whistleblowing national security secrets that are classified at a top secret level knowingly when you have been charged to protect those secrets. That is completely different than Julian Assange, who was the editor-in-chief of a website that was accepting secrets from all over the world.
Yes.
He himself being an Australian citizen. And then Chelsea Manning, who is a Army private or sergeant, something like that.
Sounds right.
Low-level Army person, gives those secrets to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks publishes those secrets. And now somehow the United States tries to pursue Assange under the Espionage Act.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here